What's up, guys? Today we're going to be reacting to a recent discussion between Paul Vanderklay, somebody who I've been kind of following for a while. He talks a lot about the sociology, psychology behind religion. He's a Calvinist minister. He is kind of in this Jordan Petersonian space. He's been commenting on Jordan Peterson for a while now. He's had plenty of conversations with Jonathan Peugeot and just people in that space. And he's interesting. He has a lot of experience as a minister, but he's also, what I've noticed, willing to talk about religion with people who don't see things the same way that he does, and that always makes for good conversation. This discussion right here with Mr. Craig Biddle. Craig Biddle, if you guys don't know, I believe he's a fan of Ayn Rand. He's a Randian, and he's going to be putting forth this idea that we can have morality without religion. We can have morality just based on logic, based on reason, and religion is something holding people back. And it's really interesting, this discussion. It's really, it's almost sort of a debate, but it's not framed as a debate. And also, I think Paul Vanderklay very masterfully does not allow it to become a debate. He kind of, I think, just totally sidesteps what this guy is trying to do to begin with. But I was watching this video and I thought it would make for a good reaction, because I think in this video we're going to see a lot of where atheist and religious people are kind of not necessarily understanding each other and at times talking past each other. And I do think that in this video you will see displayed by Paul Vanderklay a much greater theory of mind for his opponent than his opponent possesses for him. Anyways, we're going to be reacting to it and kind of going over it. I've skipped over some of the intro sections and we're just going to kind of hop straight into it.
Again, just sort of developed a following of other people who were interested in sort of thinking out loud, exploring, pursuing ideas. I think a lot of people found it surprising that a Christian minister would like doing this in public, because often religion has a reputation of sort of being straitjacketed and siloed, but I've never been that way and I've never found religion to be that way. So I've just always done what I've done, and found a whole bunch of other people that wanted to join the journey.
Good. Well, what I like to do on this podcast is just, put some thoughts on the table and try to figure out some deeper understanding of whatever it is we're looking at. I call the podcast Understanding precisely because I love that concept, understanding. It implies that whatever abstractions we're working with are or should be undergirded. There should be something standing under them, connecting these ideas to reality.
That is something we're going to find over the course of this discussion. Craig Biddle does not actually, he doesn't stand up to his own scrutiny. He actually doesn't follow his own imposed standard, because the atheist here is putting forth this idea that we should have good reasons for believing what we believe. We should have good reasons for our knowledge claims. And what we'll find is that he's going to press Mr. Paul Vanderklay very hard on this, and Paul is going to, I think, very masterfully sidestep this whole question. And what Paul could easily do is turn around and say, okay, let's turn your own standard back on you. He doesn't do that. I think he is more ironic. I think he is trying to kind of walk Craig to more of a psychological conclusion as it regards religion and the function of religion. He's sort of just avoiding the debate, or avoiding any sort of arguments altogether, mainly because I think he rightfully understands that won't get anyone anywhere. Craig's not going to be converted over the course of this discussion, and also argument is just not very good at converting people in general. But yeah, we'll see how much Mr. Craig actually follows his own standard that he is kind of set up to begin with,
and thus justifying our embrace of them and our use of them. So central to what you do, I think, and certainly to what I do, is the question of how we know what we know. How do we form the knowledge that we have? How do we justify it? How do we validate it? And which concepts and ideas are legitimate? Now, you being a pastor, and by the way, my father is an Episcopal minister, so I come from that. Zone, at least in my early life. What I'd like to do is talk about your worldview and what are the elements of it, and why do you believe what you believe? Now, that's obviously, we're talking about the whole breadth of philosophy in a sense there. But I like to go there because I want to figure out, what is the essence of what you believe, and what's the essence of the reason you believe it?
Yeah. It's a big question. I think there's always, so I'm a pastor and I'm not a scholar, which means I'm not primarily a theoretician. I'm much more, I work with regular people in terms of their application. And so there's always a question, do we sort of start from above and work down, or start from inside and work out? And I tend to like to start from inside and work out because everybody has an inside that they're working out from. Even though I think, especially in modern period, we have tended to want to start above and try to work down.
So Paul is making a really good point here, which is that Craig is bringing up a question of epistemology. How do we know what we know? How do we justify our knowledge claims? And what Paul is putting forward here, and what he's put forth in a lot of different videos, is actually that the modern sort of atheist worldview, or the modern secular worldview, has this assumption that it never questions. It's the assumption that we can, through our autonomous reason, look at all of these other cultures, all of these other religions, and we can make judgments on them. We can know if they're true. We can test the truth claims of the Bible. We can test, the truth claims of Jesus and the miracles of Jesus with our scientific rationality, because we're modern people and we're smarter than everyone else that came before us, right? And what we don't understand is that the same way in which the secular modernist is looking at the religious personality and saying they're so backward, they don't even know why they believe what they believe. They're just believing things because they don't have good rationalizations for their belief, for their faith, or this or that. What we don't realize is that every single person is operating on what Paul is going to continually call a silo. You are interpreting the world through a lens, okay? Whether you like it or not. I'm a videographer, and if you've ever tried to capture an image on a camera without a lens, like just with the camera sensor itself, it doesn't pick up anything. It doesn't pick up anything. You literally cannot get an image on the camera unless you have some sort of lens. And depending on the lens that you add to your camera sensor, you're going to get a different perspective. You're going to get a different image. Now, is the image, is the thing that you're capturing still the same thing? Yeah, you can make the argument that it is the same thing. Like, for example, if I'm taking a portrait of, my wife, and I am using this lens, it's going to actually make the image or the representation of her face either thinner or more circular, depending on all the specs and facets of this lens. And so the idea is that there's a conceit in the modern worldview, which is that because we're modern people, we have like an objective scientific lens to look at everything, and we can know things for certain. But religious worldviews and these other cultures that don't put as much of an emphasis on things like science or empiricism, this view that we can only know things through sense data, the modern rationalist worldview sort of takes for granted that it can know anything at all, or that it is able to, without any sort of bias, observe and critique and evaluate all of these other worldviews. Essentially, it's a worldview that believes that it's not a worldview.
So for me, how do I believe, or how do I know what I know? Why do I believe what I believe? How is my worldview formed? I think it has to, in some ways, be connected to the chronology of my life. I was born to a couple, Stan and Barb, in Paterson, New Jersey. I'm a third generation minister, and so I grew up in a clergy tradition. I grew up in a religious tradition, which is the Christian Reformed Church, which were Dutch Calvinists. And I grew up in it was sort of an outreach mission by the Christian Reformed Church, because in the 50s, the Dutch immigrants that had come the 50 years, 70 years before that were moving out of Paterson, and African Americans were moving up from the South. There were some people in those churches that saw that many of these African Americans were coming up poor. They were struggling, and so Christian churches tried to do some missions to help with a variety of things. And then that was the first job that my father took, and he was there for 36 years. And so that context, in a place and time with a religious tradition, very much molded the beginning of my journey, where I started from. And as is so often the case, those early years and their impact, whether or not we can sort of develop a theory about them or abstractions about them, those things really set us, at least at a particular place in time, on a journey of knowing and a journey of being. And so, given who my parents were and what they taught me, and both the in real life socioeconomic context, which was a place of a lot of migration, white folks were moving out, African Americans moving in, eventually Puerto Ricans would move in, people from the Arab world would move in. So I grew up in a very live context of a lot of different cultures, so a lot of different competing knowing, but yet within a worldview in a church and a community that was also quite stable. So for me, and with very good parents, very credible parents, very much missionaries to a slightly different world from where they grew up in. So for me, it was a Christian worldview. I believe that there is a God who governs the universe and made all of us, and that God is a loving God, and that God wants good things for us.
Okay, so Paul, I think, gave a good answer here, because if this were a debate, that would not be a satisfying answer, because in a debate, appealing to personal experience, appealing to a psychological report, appealing to an emotional sort of reasoning, that is not good in a debate. It's not logical. The whole idea with debate is you have to be very rigorous and logical. But this is a conversation, and the question was not how do you, well, I suppose the question was how do you justify your beliefs, but it was also why do you believe what you believe? And the problem that I noticed with Craig's whole approach to things like truth or things like religion or reason or whatever is he kind of conflates these two. Why do you believe this, and how do you justify it? And he thinks that those are two of the same questions. He thinks that your why is also the way that you justify it and ground it logically. And what Paul is pointing out here is that that's not how people believe things. It's also, it wouldn't be possible for all people in all contexts, or even most people, or even some people in some contexts, to come to their beliefs rationally, entirely rationally. Don't get me wrong. I think people can come to beliefs rationally, but what I do not think is possible, and Paul is kind of pointing this out, is that people can immediately transcend their context, the context that has allowed them to even begin to understand the world or begin to think that they understand the world, and get outside of that and have some like objective view of morality or reality or anything. What's ironic is that the only way you actually could have that, the only way you could have an objective account of reality that is outside of yourself is revelation. Okay. But Paul just sort of kind of sidesteps this whole question of, how do you justify belief in God? How do you justify, why do you believe what you believe? And Paul just says, well, why do I believe what I believe? Because my parents, because of my upbringing, because this is what shaped me. That's a valid answer to that question. It might not be a rigorous logical argument, but again, this is not a debate necessarily. This is a discussion. And so, yeah.
And a good life is lived. One of the defining documents of the Christian Reformed Church is the Heidelberg Catechism, and it has a structure of misery, deliverance, gratitude. So the structure is that, to paraphrase it in a way, in this world you will have trouble. And so misery is something that will find you. Christ, and sent from God by his generosity, has delivered us from the threat of hell, the tyranny of the devil. And so then what we should do is live in grateful obedience to him. Our Christian practices, our morality is not something that we are doing in the quest of earning God's love or earning God's salvation, but by virtue of the fact that what Christ has done for us in this world is a gift. This is a way of gratitude that we can live to express our appreciation for what God has done. And so that, even though the Heidelberg Catechism is 500 years old, comes filtered through the Dutch Calvinists, through immigration, all the way down into this tiny little missional effort at one place in time. There were a couple of very stable, godly people who worked out their salvation, very much molded me, and that was the beginning of really what shaped my world. And then everything in the last 62 years has been continual process of, okay, refining that, recalibrating, figuring it out, making it my own.
Got it. So I want to zero in sort of on one thing and that's the essence, I think.
Okay, get ready, because Craig Biddle right here, you're essentially going to see like the atheist short circuit. And I think I don't believe in this whole we gotta treat each other with mutual understanding and let's find some common ground. We're supposed to tear down everything that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, against the knowledge of Christ, right? That's what the scriptures say. And also, the fool in his heart says there is no God. And also, whoever is not with me is against me. Whoever does not gather with me scatters. That's what Christ says. I think that atheism is very foolish. I think it's very foolish. I think it's very prideful and arrogant. And what we're going to find here with Craig Biddle is he's going to insist that Paul nail down an explanation. Explain to me why you believe in God. Explain to me how you justify this. Now he's going to kind of cover it up in this, buttoned up, nice, friendly. Oh, well, I'm trying to find a rational justification. They're always going to sort of pretend like they're your friend, or they're going to pretend like, I'm really concerned with just logic and reason and just human flourishing. But that's not true. I mean, it's really not true. Anyways, what we're going to find here is straight up short-circuiting on the part of Craig Biddle. And it's going to be, it's funny.
Of the base of your belief system here, I think, and that is you believe that there's a God who I take it is this is the traditional, Christian God who created the universe, is the maker of truth and moral law. How would you define this God? Or hit that accurately, and then why do you believe in him? What are the facts that support that belief?
Yeah, when I started a number of years ago, Jordan Peterson had to sit down with Sam Harris, and they wanted to sort of, figure this thing out. Of course, Sam Harris quite famously was a new atheist. Jordan Peterson was sort of a difficult to define Jungian with respect to this question, because Jung's definition of God is, I think, quite a bit different from what, let's say, my grandparents and great-grandparents would have imagined God to be. When I listened to, at the end of the first Vancouver conversation.
So here's an interesting point, and I think that Paul has kind of definitely latched onto this as a result of his following Jordan Peterson for a while. There is kind of some divergence in the online space because obviously Jordan Peterson is the reason why a lot of people began to re-engage with the religious questions of life, right? I remember I was working at an airport, and I would listen to Jordan Peterson lectures on Genesis for hours on end. I would listen to his personality and his transformation lectures, and it made me, this guy who was a just straight up burnout, kind of in a dead end job, it made me begin to really consider again the faith that I had been raised with, and it made me realize that there is some real depth to be plumbed in terms of these stories, in terms of both their psychological importance, their symbolic importance, and also just their ability to guide the human person throughout all situations in life, all ways, like all possible scenarios in life. And so Jordan Peterson, I do have him to thank for that. However, one critique that a lot of people have had about Jordan Peterson is his God is kind of this impersonal force. God is kind of an idea. I have on my shelf behind me, We Who Wrestle with God. And that was a book by Jordan Peterson. I did a review of that book, if you want to go check it out on my YouTube channel. And Peterson's conception of God, while it was enough to kind of re-engage a lot of young men and a lot of people who were seeking meaning in the modern world, it is in some ways a little bit insufficient. I mean, as we can see with what seems like kind of the interpersonal turmoil going on with Jordan Peterson, and that I'm not here to judge him. He has helped me so much, and I have nothing bad to say about him. However, a lot of people close to him have spoken about the fact that faith is something he kind of struggles with. And so what Paul's going to be putting forth here, and what I think is really important to clarify, is that the Christian conception of God, which Paul is a Calvinist. I'm not a Calvinist. I'm an Orthodox Christian. So me and Paul would even have slightly different understandings of that God. But at minimum, we would agree that this is a personal. This is a person. God is a person. God is not an impersonal, just like force, abstract force. God's not an idea, and that's very central. It's very key here. And yeah.
Conversation. Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris was a little frustrated with Jordan. He said, well, tell me about this God. And Jordan Peterson reads a list of attributes. And I recognize those attributes from a lot of like early reformational documents that were trying to explain the Reformation, usually to European monarchs who were killing people for these ideas. And out of this, I developed something that I called God number one and God number two. God, if you look at the work of John Vervaeke, he'll often talk about the agent-arena relationship. And God is both an arena in which we live. You can find this in the book of Acts and Paul's Mars Hill speech. In him we live and move and have our being. And then God is also an agent who comes to Abraham, comes to Jacob, comes to David, comes to Moses, and then is embodied in Jesus Christ. And so much more recently, after I had started working on this stuff, I found some of the work of Ezekiel Kaufman, who was a Jewish scholar in the 1930s, who was trying to delineate the strange differences between the Hebrew Bible and the surrounding, the worldview of Israel's neighbors. And again, he highlighted the fact that almost all worldviews imagine that there's this meta-divine realm up there in which gods inhabit, but those gods must serve the rules of this meta-divine realm. And this meta-divine realm is impersonal. It's always a little, how does this realm form, so on and so forth. And he noted that part of what Israel does is it says that their God, who clearly is an agent, I mean, he speaks, he acts, he decides, he chooses, he's also a context within which all of that action happens. There isn't another thing above God. So for me, I believed in this God basically because I was raised with it. This was the worldview that was formed in me from a very young age. But one of the things that when I listened to Sam Harris, I heard was an assumption that God is another thing in the universe. And so,
see, and this is really important because, and maybe that's part of the reason why the discussion between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson couldn't really make any progress. And it's because they're kind of talking past each other. And also, I don't think that Jordan Peterson's conception of God really is equipped to presupp the atheist in the way that he needs to be presupped. Okay. The atheist needs a spanking, and the impersonal concept of God cannot do that. It cannot do that in terms of a worldview. And one thing that's also really interesting here, and just something to look out for as we're moving forward, Paul Vanderklay is a Dutch Calvinist. And one thing that's really distinct about Calvinism is their kind of orientation toward belief and the idea that people don't really choose what they believe. And there's a sense in which that's true, but I want to qualify it and say that whereas in Calvinism they would say the individual has no choice in what they believe, in Orthodoxy we would affirm that the individual has some choice. You do have some choice, but also there are a lot of things outside of your control. And the idea is we don't want to overemphasize one or the other. Okay, we don't want to go to one or the other dialectical extreme. But I think in this conversation, Paul's viewpoint as it regards the way people come to belief, I think it's sufficient to demonstrate to the atheist that like this project of everyone coming to a rational understanding of how to behave and how to, and what the good is and philosophy and stuff, it's a fairy tale. It is like that would be more miraculous than a man rising from the dead.
So again, my friend John Vervaeke, he is identifying as a non-theist. And as he talked about his non-theism, I actually heard a lot of what I had seen as classical theism in understanding that God is not just another thing in the universe, but God is in some ways, as Paul says, I think trying to communicate to polytheistic pagans, God is an arena in which we live, and God is also an agent within that arena. And so one of the easiest examples of this is the question of if, let's say, Aragorn could find Tolkien in Middle-earth. And on one hand, you would say Aragorn could look all over, Strider could walk all over Middle-earth and never find Tolkien. But in another way, every place that Strider goes, Tolkien is there.
And that's a really, I think, great point. Because what the atheist doesn't understand is they say, well, where's this evidence for God? Show me the evidence. Greg Bahnsen, the guy whose green book I'm putting my microphone on top of right now in a very professional manner, he spoke about what's called the crackers in the pantry fallacy. And what he means is essentially that different sorts of claims require different sorts of proofs and evidences in order to prove them. You wouldn't go about proving the existence of God or the existence of logic and reason in the same way that you would go about proving that there's crackers in the pantry. Well, if you want to prove that there's crackers in the pantry, you would just go into the next room and open the pantry and see, are there crackers here? You can't do that with something like God. You can't do that with something like logic. You can't do that with something with, like reason or meaning. Those aren't things that you can just open a door and figure out if they're there or not. And what the atheist doesn't understand, I think, about God and the theist view is that God is not just another being. God is not just another being that's out there. Okay, God is beyond being. Being is derived from God. There's no being before there is God. Okay, and so, we talk about, he makes a great point here about how can Aragorn walk through Middle-earth and find Tolkien? Because obviously Tolkien wrote the Lord of the Rings series. It would be insane to answer, to try to answer the question, can Aragorn find Tolkien in Lord of the Rings or in Middle-earth? Because the idea is that, Tolkien made the whole place. Every single little piece of that place, including every single little facet of Aragorn as a person or a character, is Tolkien or is. But we would want to put this into context. We'd want to qualify this by saying we're not pantheists. We don't believe that this desk is God. We don't believe, but the Bible says that God is He in whom we all move and breathe and have our being. And that's what the concept of God is, arena. But then God is also agent. God is acting in the world. And one way that I've heard this explained really well is the concept of immanent transcendence. Okay. And we don't want to emphasize one or the other, we don't want to overemphasize one or the other, because if we overemphasize, let's say, immanence, God is here, God is everywhere. Well, then that's pantheism, because you're saying literally all of these things are God. But then if you overemphasize, say, transcendence, God is far away, he's so far beyond us, we can never, well, that gets into deism, where you never actually truly experience God, you never know God, and therefore the concept of God is sort of meaningless. We want to emphasize that God is both immanent, he's here, but he's also transcendent. He is beyond, he exists and is beyond existence. Okay. And this is sort of, it's paradoxical, but also so is the concept of 1 and 3, that God is both 1 and 3, and also God is beyond number. That's something the atheists cannot understand.
And so,
or maybe not that they can't understand, but they refuse to understand.
I think part of what happened in the modern period is that this relationship between God as arena and God as agent sort of got squeezed through deism. And many Christians now basically have reduced God to an agent within an arena, but they don't see God as also arenic in the way that, let's say, Tolkien is arenic to Middle Earth, or even parents, your mother, is arenic to the home you grew up in. And so for me, God is, as Alvin Plantinga noted, you can simply assume in that we are living in a reality, and rather than trying to go to the lengths of trying to discover God in the way that, let's say, Aragorn would try to find Tolkien in Middle Earth.
Okay, so God as an arena and an agent. So let's focus first. I get.
Do you see like the actual gears turning in Craig Biddle's head? He is like literally struggling so hard to even follow what Paul is saying.
Yes, on the agency aspect, if you will. So the hypothesis here is that there's an agent who is the creator of reality, the creator, I take it, of the arena as well. And then my question would be, why do you believe that there is that, or even a need for that hypothesis of this agent?
Again, he's already said in the beginning, the reason or the why behind him believing it has a lot to do with his context, his upbringing.
Well, the reason I believe it is because I was simply raised with it. I mean, that's the most obvious reason I believe it. Okay.
Now you're going to get the atheists in the comments, oh, he says he believes it just because he was raised with it. Well, right. Him saying that, he's being a little bit more honest than you, Mr. Atheist Man, because Mr. Atheist Man is like, I came to my decisions rationally and logically. It's like, really? You came to atheism rationally and logically? Are you sure you weren't just in middle school and you really wanted to, you know, you heard about, hey, there's these certain sets of behaviors you shouldn't really be engaging in because God does not approve of these. And then I have a feeling that it was the rationalizing came right after being told, hey, there's these things that God doesn't want you to do. There's these things that are sinful. And then the rationality kicked in, and they were like, how do I rationalize my way out of having to actually be moral and being good? How do I rationalize my own view of the world and reality and morality where I can just do whatever I want all the time? Yeah, I have a morality. Yeah, I'm a moral person. I have a moral philosophy. Yeah, it's called doing whatever I want all the time.
And the idea that I have to...
Jesus said, be a good person, man. Jesus said, pretty much do whatever you want all the time, and you're fine.
To justify this is a rather interesting question.
Perhaps. I mean, yeah, I think it is interesting. I would think that. I mean, I was raised with the idea that there's a God as well, but I don't. But I challenged the idea and demanded evidence to support the idea, and none was forthcoming.
You know what's really interesting, and I mean, Paul doesn't do this; he very easily could. But the idea is that so you used your reason to demand, you use your reason to demand a justification for belief in God. Did you demand a justification for a reason?
So I just dispensed with it. Do you think?
But again, you won't dispense with reason. You also won't try and establish your justification for reason. What we're going to find here is that the initial conversation was framed as a question of epistemology. How do we know what we know? And the atheist is supposed to be lauded. Oh, the atheist, he's so good. He's so good. He doesn't believe anything unless he has good reasons for it. Oh my gosh, he's so awesome. He's so awesome for that, for not believing something unless he can justify it. He will never be able to give a justification for a reason. Well, let me slightly edit that statement. He'll never be able to give a justification for a reason that does not sound like the exact reason that he is rejecting belief in God.
That people should believe what they were raised to believe?
I don't think, number one, we are fully in control of our beliefs.
This is a much more mature view of the nature of belief than what Craig Biddle has. I mean, look at him. He's like almost cross-eyed here. You did not come to atheism rationally. Like, come on. You did not do that. You didn't sit down and think, let me work through a series of syllogisms and come to an understanding of whether or not I should believe in God. No, you heard something. You heard something that you heard a commandment that you were like, ooh, I don't want to do that. I want to do the opposite of that. I also saw a video where Alex Malpass was saying, theists always say that, atheists are atheists because they secretly want to do something sinful. And I just think, you doth protest too much. What kind of weird stuff do you have going on? And it's like, yeah, dude. You ask any Christian person, hey, have you ever desired to sin? Have you ever desired to do something sinful that like you knew was wrong? And they'll be like, yeah. Yes. So it's like, they think that they have this sort of like, oh, gotcha. Oh, I bet you have some messed up desires. It's like, yeah, I do. Yes. Their idea of what like religion is or what religion is for is, it's just a way for you to feel better about yourself and think that other people are lesser. It's like, what's that Norm Macdonald's quote where he's like, there's nothing in my Christianity that tells me I'm better than other people. If anything, it tells me the opposite. It's just, they truly do not know what they are rejecting.
I think people believe what they believe. Now, to evaluate those beliefs is often a good thing, but there are whole hosts of things that I can't demonstrate with any kind of proof. The real question that governs me in terms of what I believe are all these other beliefs and presuppositions that I can't prove or demonstrate. Probably I have to do it to a degree to myself, but even as such, I simply believe what I believe, and I often try to justify other beliefs, but work them through on the basis of all sorts of assumptions that I'm simply not in control of. I mean, I woke up this morning. When I woke up, I remembered some dreams that I had, and I've been walking around, and there's been a rather amazing environment that I've been living through for the past number of hours. But I can't demonstrate to you that I am or aren't dreaming. And there are many times when you dream that you imagine you're living. So great point here, which is essentially that Craig Biddle has this kind of juvenile idea that every single belief that he has is rationally justified. And every time he comes across one that's not rationally justified, he turns around and has a rational justification for it, because he'll find it. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. I'm not going to be silly. I'm not going to believe anything on faith. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm not going to do. No, that's not me. Except Paul Vanderklay is making a great point here, which is essentially that in the atheist, materialist, or empiricist worldview, take your pick, it always reduces to solipsism. Okay, it always reduces to having to doubt that you even exist or that anything exists outside of your noumenal experience. Maybe I'm hallucinating all this right now. Maybe I'm not live streaming.
Well, I know I'm not live streaming. I'm pre-recording this, so that actually would be a hallucination if I thought I was live streaming. But maybe this is a hallucination. Maybe I'm not recording a YouTube video right now. Okay? You kind of have to take on faith that any of this is real. Okay? Craig Biddle will never. He'll just say, well, no, I knock on something and I feel it and I really think that I'm experiencing these things. Why do you think that? You haven't justified that. You haven't, and you cannot. David Hume. You haven't read David Hume? Okay? You haven't read the actual like people that your supposed philosophy is like derived from? Actually, he's not a skeptic. He's an objectivist. Whatever, dude. Okay? Philosophy is dead. Philosophy is dead.
So the idea that somehow there's an ought in me, I think most of my oughts have to do with my behaviors. And I think, again, most of our beliefs come unbidden. And I think that's actually a very good thing, because if I walk in the middle of this busy street that my church is in and try to imagine I'm in the middle of a placid cornfield and not a modern urban road, it's a really good thing I'm not in charge of my beliefs, because I would really want a lot of what I'm picking up by my senses to govern my behaviors and have me get out of the road.
Yeah, I think that's a good example, but I think it kind of goes to the importance of a foundation for beliefs. I mean, the reason that we don't step in front of speeding traffic is because we see the speeding traffic and we know through experience that hard objects that hit you at high speeds can destroy you. And so this isn't a belief in the sense of something that's up for negotiation or even in need of justification at this point. This is a perceptual.
Oh, so, okay. Guys, that's not something that's in need of justification, because it just is. Another thing, too, is that because he's an Ayn Rand fan, because he's an objectivist, he, again, has this really goofy idea that there's such a thing as given beliefs. Well, that's just a given. I mean, that's just obvious. I mean, that's just objective. It just is. Okay, can we say God just is? It's just obvious. I know from experience. It doesn't need a justification. Are we being? Please be so for real right now. Like, this is
level recognition of a fact of reality. When it comes to the God issue, we're not talking about a speeding truck and perception and causal relationships that we can observe and that we have, a world of experience about. We're talking, I think, about the hypothesis that there's this agent that created this place, this arena, if you will, and that that he is the dictator of not only truth but moral right and wrong, and that we have some reason that we have to be obedient to his dictates. That is not, in my view, at all like viewing the speeding traffic. So my question is, why do you believe that there is this being rather than just saying, in effect?
Don't you hate when people say rather? Totally beside the point, but man, that gets on my nerves.
Which is the way that I approach the world. I open my eyes, and my belief system begins with what I perceive. I perceive a reality in which I exist. I perceive entities. I perceive the fact that entities act in certain ways and interact in certain ways.
That's an assumption. Okay. We're assuming a self. Perceive. Okay. We're assuming perception. That I, again, referring to the former assumption, exist. Oh. What does that even mean? There's a whole host of assumptions in just that statement. I perceive that I exist. It's the cogito. It's the cogito ergo sum of René Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I'm going to doubt everything. And I'm going to get down to the bottom of it and figure out the one thing that I can't doubt, and then I'm going to build everything else off of it. And that's foundationalist epistemology, which is what Craig Biddle is putting forth here. And what he doesn't understand is that in the history of philosophy, this has been demonstrated to be a failed project. He has not done his homework. He hasn't done his homework. He also apparently hasn't engaged in this supposedly objective, rational process that he's telling us is so easy for everyone. So,
trucks, if they hit you, will destroy you as an instance of that. And this, to me, is a reasonable base for the rest of my beliefs. I'm going to start my thinking with the way that things are at the perceptual level, and then I'm going to form, concepts and propositions and generalizations and principles on that basis so that I can understand this world in which I live.
This basis, which is not a basis.
And use that knowledge to flourish. I don't
flourish. Again, we're going to assume, what is flourishing? What is flourishing? Because if I'm only perceiving what things are, let's take for granted, let's assume that you actually are able to perceive the world and that you actually exist. That just tells us what is. Again, it's the is-ought problem. You can't get an ought from an is. Things are this way. Great. What ought we do about it?
see why any of the hypothesis about a creator of the universe or an agent who tells me what's good and bad is needed or useful in any of that. So that's
what's kind of funny too is that he's saying, I don't know why it's necessary that an agent that tells me what's good or bad is necessary. And then he's going to turn right around and later on in this interview, he's going to say, well, we can, through philosophy, tell ourselves what's good and bad, or we can tell other people what's good and bad. Wait, I thought we didn't need an agent to tell us what's good and bad.
That's what I'm trying to get at is why do you suppose that he's a thing?
He's not a thing. God is not a thing. He's beyond thingness.
Well, I don't suppose that he's a thing.
There you
go. So are you suggesting he does not exist?
No, I'm saying things are things. Oh, first of all,
what, do you suppose that he does not exist? Well, existence is dependent on him. Existence comes from God. There's no existence without God. Okay, that's what I'm arguing. If you could just, the big thing too is that, these atheists, they're literally so prideful, so arrogant, they won't even engage with with the type of deity that you're describing.
First of all, when you've asked me why I believe this, and generally speaking, if you would say, why is my car yellow? And the answer to that would be, well, there was a manufacturing plant and there was a business arrangement and there was paint and that was the process that yielded that yellow car. And so I think the best answer to why I believe is in fact the answer that this is in fact what I grew up with. And this is in fact what molded me and shaped me. That's basically the same answer to the why my car is yellow and why I believe this.
Okay. So, but you can see that your car is yellow and you can see that it exists. And so this is a perception.
How can we see that it exists? All I can see is that I myself appear to be perceiving through what I think is sight, what I think is yellow, and what I think is a car, and what I think exists. But I can't see that something exists in Craig's framework.
Actual level existent that we're talking about, and it has certain qualities, and we can identify.
And I think they get frustrated because they're like, oh, what? So you don't think the world exists? It's like, no, I do think that the world exists. What I'm saying is you are borrowing from the Christian metaphysical paradigm in order to even make claims like the yellow car exists. What I'm saying is you're rejecting the very foundations that you're saying God doesn't exist, justify God. Also, at the same time, I'm going to stand on that foundation and make all these claims and pretend like the foundation doesn't exist. So in short, you have to presuppose Christianity to even begin to critique Christianity.
Identify those through our senses. The issue of God and acceptance of his existence, and I understand that you're saying that you're the main reason you believe it is because you were raised that way, but we can challenge the ideas we were raised with. And if everyone just accepts the ideas that they were raised with, and that's the right, and if we say, well, that's the right way to do things, then we're all at an impasse with each other, because you can't have conversations and say, well, look, I was raised this way, but I challenged it, and somebody else just says, well, I'm not going to challenge what I was raised with. That's just the way that I was raised. So let me ask it this way: do you think that we should check the premises, in effect, that we are raised with? A, and B, and maybe this is maybe we ought to go here. What do you think is our means of knowledge?
He said, don't you think we should check the premises? See, the idea with the Christian worldview is that God is literally, maybe it might not be the right word to use. God is not something you can. There's a quote from Soren Kierkegaard. Maybe it's not a quote. Maybe it's a paraphrase by that lecturer. He did a bunch of really great lectures. He has a really kind of popular lecture on Marcus Aurelius. I'm forgetting his name. He's great. He passed away recently, but he said, forget trying to prove God exists. You couldn't figure out how to doubt him. Okay, you couldn't figure out how to doubt God's existence. And what we're saying is, you saying, let me check the premise God exists, or let me check the premise of God's of God. It's actually not possible, because you're assuming the Christian worldview when you begin to, or when you undertake the idea in your mind that you're going to try and rationally scrutinize the deity. You're assuming you are assuming that you exist. You're assuming that rationality exists. You're assuming that we can come to knowledge of the world. You're assuming that your experience is meaningful. You're assuming all of these things, which can only be grounded in the Christian paradigm. And so him saying, well, shouldn't we check the premise that God is real? That's like saying, shouldn't you bite your teeth? I mean,
is our means of knowledge social agreement? So familiar ideas, we're just told things, and that would sort of be a social view of knowledge. Or is our means of knowledge what I would say, which is reason, observation, logic, conceptualization? Or perhaps is faith a means of knowledge? And I wonder if that needs to come in here to understand where you're coming from.
Well, I think the means question is exactly the same as the car paint question, because the means of the knowledge that I have is the life that has led me to this point. You seem to be asking for a justification of something, whereas you've said means, and again, I would argue that the means of me being where I am in April of 2026 is in fact the life and the thinking and the environment and everything that I've been living until this point.
Yeah.
That's the means by which I've gotten here.
Okay, I understand that, and I agree with this point. Like, I am who I am here because of the things that I've done in the past, the beliefs I've accepted, the environment I grew up in, the choices I made. All of that together constitutes who I am and what I believe. However, we can, I think, zero in on the question of you're saying justification. I would just call it knowledge or acceptance of ideas as true. I do not just resign myself to, I was raised this way and I went through these things, and therefore I'm going to accept whatever happens to be in my head because of that history. I challenge.
What is so funny is what he just described himself as not doing. That is exactly what he's doing.
And I advocate in the people I work with that they challenge the premises in their minds to say, well, what undergirds this? Are there any facts that give rise to this idea, or is it just, made up without any grounding in reality?
Again, he will never do this with reason. Hopefully one day he will. I pray that he will. He's not so far done that with reason. He's not even tried to justify reason. He hasn't even said, look, I know a lot of theists, they will come at atheists and say, well, you don't have a justification for reason. And out of good faith, I've went ahead and taken 5 minutes before this little interview, and I've tried to come up with a good explanation. Here you go. Just in good faith, right? I want to show you that I really am serious about coming to rational knowledge and truth.
I'll take an example maybe that would be helpful, and we'll take a meaty one. We keep hearing about social justice as if it's some kind of a thing. And I would ask of that, if I hear some kind of a concept like that, I say, well, what is this thing you're calling social justice? What are the facts that undergird and support this? Or another way of thinking about it, what is the referent in reality? What is the thing you're talking about? And if somebody comes back and says, well, it's the kind of justice that involves concern for other people and what they need, I would say, well, how is that different from regular justice? Justice is a virtue about concern for what's right and wrong with respect to people. Why are we putting the concept of social in front of this? And as I probe this kind of thing.
Another thing I want to point out is that earlier he said that it was wrong to believe in faith because you were grown up that way and because of social consensus. Your family and your community agreeing on these things. That's a bad justification for faith. But then we turn right around, and if we were to ask, what is your justification for your idea of justice? What is justice in an objective sense? What is right and wrong, moral right and wrong in an objective sense? He would not be able to appeal to anything except consensus.
What you find is that the people who are advocating social justice are not after justice, meaning people should be judged rationally on the basis of the relevant facts and then treated accordingly. They are instead trying to integrate socialism, redistribution of wealth or the like, with the concept of justice as if they can be fused. And I would challenge that. So I say, no, I don't believe that redistribution of wealth can be just if it's forced. I think it's factually unjust, right? So this is an instance of where if some idea comes into my head, or if a young person I'm working with has some idea like this, I say, hey, let's check the premise here. Let's challenge what we're being told is true. So coming back to the issue of God, if you are raised to believe that there is a God, I would say the same thing here. I would say, well, look, why am I going to accept this idea that there's this agent who created the universe? Is there any evidence to support it? And are there any facts that undergird it and justified in my mind? So I'll stop there, but do you think we don't need that kind of epistemological?
It's not that we don't need it, it's that you literally could not begin to doubt it.
Inquiry?
I don't think that process is what people think it is. And I don't think it governs in the way that for the last few hundred years, people have aspired to hope it would govern. I don't think people work that way. One simple question is, are facts things?
Well, the concept of fact exists because...
The concept exists. Well, hold on now. I thought we were only looking at... How do you know that the concept exists? That sounds like a Platonist kind of thing, the realm of ideal forms. How do we know that concepts exist? How do we know that concepts aren't just constructs, that humans made them up?
There are objects, entities, and...
There are objects. Okay. Again, you're just asserting the existence of something.
Ways that they interact, and we need as human beings to...
There are ways that they interact, meaning that there's causal relations. Are you not aware of the fact that David Hume doubted that there was causal relations between things? The thing about the whole skepticism game, I'm only going to believe what I can give good reasons for. It ends in solipsism because there's nothing you cannot doubt. Okay? And I put doubt in air quotes because earlier I made the case that you actually couldn't even begin to doubt God. That's because in the Christian worldview, everyone knows God is real. Okay? Everyone knows God is real. People suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Sin sort of obscures that knowing from people's minds, and they come up with rational justifications for why it's probably uncertain or blah, blah, blah. And then those same atheist people will get very kind of nervous. They've literally done brain scans on people where they get heightened anxiety when they're read out commandments and punishments, promises of punishment for sin in the Bible. Why, if you think this is fake, if you've rationally concluded that it's fake, would you be nervous about that? Unless deep down you know it's true. Okay? But, I lost my train of thought.
To have concepts to identify things. And the concept fact simply denotes a thing that is.
We have to have concepts to identify things. Okay, just because we need something to use it, that doesn't mean it exists. What if I say that we need God as a concept? Would you then say that he would exist?
Is. Yes. And I think that things are, whether you and I are used to see them or not. So let's say, a disease came along and wiped out all life on Earth, and thus, as far as we know, all life, period. Would it still be the case that when the temperature gets to a certain, coldness, that water would still freeze? Yes, that's a fact. And then I distinguish that from truth, which is recognition of fact. So facts would exist without us, but truth would not, because to have a truth, you've got to have a consciousness recognizing a fact. That's the way I would conceive of those.
What is required for something to be a thing?
That it exists and has thereby an...
Okay, that's circular. What is required for a thing to be a thing? That it exists. Wow, thank you. Wow, we're just some rigorous philosophers over here, guys. We're really blessed to have genius atheist people like this guiding us, helping us come to knowledge.
Identity, to exist is to have an identity. So if a tree exists, then it exists and has the characteristics it does, and that's what makes it what it is. So
if a tree exists, then it's because it exists, and because it is what it is.
An oak tree, it's got certain characteristics. If it's a maple, it's got others.
I have very little confidence in this entire game of grounding, justifying. I think there's some validity to it in terms of relational conversation, but the fact itself, these basic building blocks that we imagine are going to construct this, what I think is fundamentally a tool of persuasion, are unclear. And they're certainly not the kinds of, let's say, things that people would want to say, well, I don't know if there's a God because I can't interact with that thing the way I interact with other things. I just don't find this approach to human formation terribly profitable, especially if we're going to, for example, connect it with an outcome such as human flourishing. And because part of that is that I've seen a lot of people try this game of founding and justifying, and I don't know that they flourish any better than people who don't. And part of the reason for that is, even a non-theist friend of mine, John Vervaeke, who I'll often mention this to, study after study, and I imagine those studies are being produced by people who really like that game of foundations and justifications and facts, discover that people who hold religious beliefs, and again, this isn't just specifically Christian beliefs, but generally speaking, people who hold religious beliefs, when it comes to social surveys regarding sense of well-being, happiness, stability, longevity of their marriages, affluence, people who, in fact, I think in some ways resist the kind of analysis that is being proposed, those people outperform others in the sense of flourishing than the people who tend to major in this other game. And so I have a degree of skepticism with respect to that game. And I have other examples of it. For example, people might debate, whether, let's say, a particular story in the Bible, let's say the healing of the man born blind in John chapter 9, whether or not that happened because it was a miracle and, all of that sort of thing. And fair enough, we've got one version of the story from 2,000 years ago, and the witness that we have the story through is quite clearly prejudiced as someone who comes to the tomb and back to that set of facts and beliefs and groundings and things. In other words, I don't find that entire game to do what everyone imagines it should be done. And in fact, what I see as a pastor is that, for the most part, if you want to talk about flourishing and persuasion, people mostly flourish and are persuaded by many other much more physical, historical, relational dynamics than an abstract game of facts and grounding and justifying. In other words, if the goal is flourishing, and I think we could see that, well, longevity, health is better than sickness, wealth is better than poverty, happiness is better.
So PVK is being way more charitable than I would be, than he has to be. And he's pretty much saying, look, I'll grant you this concept of human flourishing, even though you haven't actually demonstrated for us or grounded for us what that concept even means, because it's so subjective. Like anyone can just say, well, my version of flourishing is I'm like a warlord with 1,000 concubines. And this other person says my concept of flourishing is, I don't know, being a billionaire with a bunch of like wage slaves and stuff. But we're going to grant, Craig, his assumption that human flourishing just means the best possible outcome for all people, which is like utilitarian, which is, again, ironic because his whole view was that socialism is bad and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, Paul is being very charitable here, saying we'll go ahead and grant that health is better than sickness, happiness is better than sadness, all of these things. What now?
Better than depression. If we look at most of those metrics, this whole game of grounding and justification really doesn't yield what I think the project of the last few centuries has promoted it to yield.
So you're suggesting then that the chaos, for instance, of January 7th, or the mass disagreement about things, is some kind of evidence to the effect that focusing on justification and how we know what's true is not relevant. And I would say it's the opposite. I would say that the fact of the kind of chaos you're talking about, and the fact of the amazing degrees of disagreement about things, in some cases things that are relatively straightforward even, is demonstration of the fact that we do need to understand fundamentals and how to ground our thinking and how to know what is true. The way that the world is right now and the way that people are interacting, in my view, is not good. It's a problem. And I think that the solution to it, the way that I think, and there's a false alternative out there that I think it's the way people think about it, and it's this. Either we're going to hunker down and go back to religion in some way and get a system here whereby we can know what's so, or we're just going to have to deal with this chaos because the alternative is simply a worldview that says there is no God and that's the end of my worldview. In other words, just atheism without any positive elements. But that's a false alternative.
It's not a false alternative, and he is going to consistently fail to show us how that's not a false alternative. He's going to assert again and again that, well, that's not the only two options that we have, and we have other options, and he's not going to provide any.
Because you can have, and what I'm advocating is a philosophy that is based on observation, mental integrations, logic, figuring out the way the world actually is. And the purpose of all of this is precisely human flourishing.
A philosophy is just a crippled religion. Okay, an ideology is just a crippled religion. An ideology is just a ready-made, productized, commodified version of a philosophy. And a philosophy is just a kind of it's like a cope form of a religion.
We live in a certain kind of world that has certain kinds of laws, the laws of identity, causality, non-contradiction, excluded, middle, and end.
How do you know the world has those laws? You have not observed these laws. You can observe 1,000 instances of a supposed law, and it only means that you've observed 1,000 particulars that appear to have this principle of regularity. You have not objectively observed a principle of regularity. You're, again, assuming the Christian worldview.
And the laws of logic. And we have a nature. We have certain needs in order to live. We can't live like an eagle. If I jump off a cliff, I'm going to die. So I have certain needs that are unique to me as a human being. I need to figure out what those needs are. And they're both physical needs and psychological needs. I've got a rational faculty, I've got an emotional faculty, I'm a complex being. We need to be able to
You're not that complex, Craig.
Identify the actual nature of human beings and the actual nature of the world in which we live so that we can then act on those ideas and flourish. I don't see where we need God or faith in any of this, and I definitely don't think that atheism is an answer to this. Atheism is just a negative. It just says there's no God. So what? So you don't believe in God. That does not tell me what you do believe in or how you're going to know what is so. I actually think the whole project, you're calling it a game, but I don't think it's a game. I think the project of doing philosophy proper is to figure out the nature of the world in which we live, the nature of the beings that we are, and then to codify principles about how we should think and act in order to flourish. And I can't imagine, well, maybe you would disagree with this, but do you think that if you try to do that with the aim of flourishing, that is hopeless? Or do you think that we can understand the world and what's necessary for human life?
If what you just described is philosophy, how many philosophers were in action on January 7th?
I think precisely zero. I don't think anyone was philosophizing then, and that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to get at is, I think, to paraphrase Ayn Rand, whose philosophy I love, bad philosophy is what got us into this mess, and only good philosophy can get us out.
Again, we're assuming things like bad and good. How do we know that, how do we even know what bad and good philosophy is? Maybe it's human flourishing to be where we are right now. Who's to say?
We are in a world now where people have walked away from philosophy, except from religion, which I regard as a kind of philosophy. It's a philosophy that, in my estimate, holds that there's a supernatural realm, including God, and that faith is a means of knowing the important truths. Now, I'm curious whether you would agree with that as a characteristic of, and I'm talking about the three major monotheistic religions here, including Christianity.
I think our category of religion is an invention of the last few hundred years. I think religion tends to be, everyone has a religion, and their religion involves that which they see as highest and how to get there. And I think everybody has that. While there were no philosophers on January 7th, everyone there and all the commentators and all the people who are watching at home and thinking this is important and voting accordingly, all of them have religion, while hardly any of them are philosophers or can or even are interested in doing the kinds of things that this sort of foundationalist philosophies wish to promote and wish to have them do, and then on the basis of those philosophies, influence those people to such a degree that those influences will govern their behavior. I would argue that everybody involved in January 7th, not just those on the ground, on both sides, not just observers, not just pundits, not just voters, all of them have a fundamental religious orientation that is in fact governing how they perceive the relationality of the so-called facts that aren't really in question.
Okay, masterclass from Paul Vanderklay right there. Everything he just now said is completely correct. Every single person has a religion. Every single person has a religious worldview. Your worldview is necessarily, essentially religious, okay? We only use the term worldview because people take umbrage with the term religion. Religion is like a cuss word now or something like that, but worldview and religion are essentially interchangeable terms, and you might not think you have a religion, but you do, okay? Craig Biddle, his weird, lame, foundationalist, Ayn Randian cult thing is a religion, okay? What's ironic is that Craig Biddle is like, religious fanaticism is the problem. In this video, he has displayed more religious fundamentalism than Paul.
Let's take another 7, because I think we may find more fruit here. Let's look at October 7th. So you have a group of people who believe in a God, and they believe that this God wants them to convert or kill infidels, and specifically also to wipe out Jews. That's why as they're doing what they're doing, they're screaming Allahu Akbar. This is a Muslim-driven mass murder, and the idea is accepted by the people who did this and by the regimes that supported it, including the Iranian regime. The reason that they're doing it is because they accept the existence of this God and that his word is the moral law. Now, the reason that they accept it is, I think, the same reason that you accept your religion. They were raised this way. And they have not done the thing that I think they should do, which is check their premises and say, well, I know the Imam told me that Allah exists and wants me to kill infidels, but where is the evidence to suggest that that is true? I don't see it. So I think October 7 is a case in point for what I'm trying to say, is that to just accept the ideas that you are raised with and then try to go out in the world and use them without checking whether the ideas make sense is going to lead us into all sorts of mayhem. Both January 7 and October 7 are instances of this, different kinds of instances, but nevertheless instances. And I think we can approach the world in a different way. So let me say a word about philosophy, and then I'd like your thoughts on this idea. You say everyone has a religion. I don't think that's true. I think a religion is a specific kind of philosophy. Philosophy is the broader umbrella, the broader term. And a religion is a particular kind of philosophy. I don't regard my philosophy as religious because my philosophy is based on observation, integration of what I perceive, the use of reason and logic. I do not believe in a supernatural dimension. I don't believe in a second reality, whether Platonic or Kantian or Christian.
Okay, well, you're contradicting yourself because earlier you said that concepts exist.
I believe in the one reality that we're in here, the one I experience every day and I'm trying to live in. So there's no supernatural dimension or second reality. And I also don't believe that faith or revelation is a means of knowledge. I don't think I can know things by just accepting that they're true or just by accepting what my parents told me. I think my only means of knowledge is reason, which I have to use on my own to.
Have you guys noticed the whole time he's just continually reasserting his position, and the whole promise of the position is that it gives reasons for everything. It gives a justification for everything. And so far we have not got a justification for anything. We haven't got a single justification for anything. Okay? Not one thing. Like, how am I supposed to do this thing you're asking me to do, which is justify all my beliefs and yada, 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 if I have nothing to go off of. I can't even imitate you. I can't even, you haven't even showed me how to do that yet. Justify one thing, like just one thing, one belief that you have, one claim, one knowledge, one fact, instead of just reasserting, this is how I think we should do it, and this is how I would do it, and this is what I believe, and this is how we know. We just know. We now know. We now know. Shout out, Ben.
To understand things. So I could go on about the nature of that philosophy, but I want to get your thoughts on the idea that there can be a philosophy like that is not a religious philosophy. And then your ideas on whether you think that people should check their premises if an imam tells them that they should go kill Jews.
I don't know if you'd rather I talk about October 7 or the tool that you have of philosophy that functions for you, in my definition, as a religion.
I'm trying to connect the two, actually. So I think this is why I'm putting both of them on the table at once.
Okay.
I think that what leads to a 10-7 is a certain kind of philosophy. And what leads to the American Revolution is another kind of philosophy. I think what leads to the Emancipation Proclamation is a certain kind of philosophy. And what leads to the Holocaust is another kind of philosophy. I think philosophy really matters. And I don't think it's all religious, because I think that freezes the abstraction of philosophy is a broad umbrella. And if you freeze the abstraction of philosophy at the level of religion, which is, I think, is just one kind of philosophy subsumed under the broader umbrella, that you're freezing out of the equation the secular worldviews and the non-supernatural worldviews that are really, really important to bear in mind. I think that the Aristotelian ideas and some of John Locke's ideas, and certainly my ideas, are not, in my view, religious. So I don't want to separate the method, the thinking process, and the philosophy from the results. I'm trying to connect those.
So let me just switch. Switch are two words that we're using, because I'm basically saying religion is universal. Everybody works out of it. Everybody has one. And religion basically is can be described as that which you think is highest and how to get there. And so let's call that a philosophy, because if you want to see philosophy as the broader term and religion as a specific thing that even though, for example, the reason I use the word religious that way is when, you have the question of, were the Greeks and Romans religious? We look back on them and say, oh yeah, they're very religious. They have temples, they have sacrifices, and when the British roll up onto the Indian subcontinent, they look around and say, oh, you're very religious. And actually, I just spoke with a scholar out of Ontario who just wrote a book on secularization, who notes that the vast majority of languages in the world never had the word that's sort of equal to our religion. This word religion is something that comes about fairly, has only been around a couple hundred years. And in fact, when the Europeans went around the world, they began saying, oh, you people who live on the Indian subcontinent, you have like sacrifices and temples and you have a religion. And they were like, no, we just know how the world works. In other words, you're using the word philosophy, this idea of knowing how the world works, in the same way that Westerners labeled the whole entire world as religious, whereas the whole world was basically saying, no, the world works this way. If I need favorable winds to get to Troy, one of the ways to do that is to offer my daughter as a sacrifice. And that's
very interesting point being put forth here by Paul, and it demonstrates an understanding of history that is far more wide, far more broad, far more well-read, which is the fact that, Craig, you really don't understand that these former civilizations, they also viewed the world in much the same way you do. The way we do it, this isn't superstition. This is just the way reality is. We've discovered through these practices. We have used our mental tools to come up with these rituals that will reliably produce us results. Us Romans, every time we go and battle another city, we propitiate their gods first and figure out the rituals to do. And we promise their gods that we will serve them better than the city we're about to go conquer. And that's why we're so great. That's why Rome is the most powerful civilization that's ever existed and will ever exist. Does this sound familiar?
That's going to get us there. And apparently, at least in Homer's mind, it seemed to work, although it had tremendous undesirable complications. Now, with respect to October 7th.
But so the idea is just that what's ironic between the quote unquote scientism or rational worldview versus the Christian worldview is that the Christian worldview is the most scientific worldview that there is. I mean, it is the people who fear religious fanaticism are more religiously fanatical, demonstrably so, about their worldview.
One of the interesting thought experiments you can do is say, okay, well, let's imagine there's no God. Would we imagine that these two ethnic groups would be trying to kill each other and warring over land and all of the things that they're fighting over? I think so.
Well, it depends on whether they've adopted a philosophy that recognizes and respects individualism, individual rights, and the need for freedom.
What the hell are rights? You've got to be kidding me with this. Like, you seriously have to be kidding. As long as they adopt a philosophy that believes in individual human rights, why do we have to believe in those? If there's no God, okay, and it's about human flourishing, well, who's flourishing? My flourishing? Or everyone's flourishing? Is it flourishing are they flourishing at my expense? Am I flourishing at their expense? Between them or me, who I gotta look out for number one. So, I mean, if there's no God, then why do I care about human rights? Legit. I mean, what are human rights? Do they exist? Do they exist? Also, I mean, I don't know if this guy believes in evolution, but like, if evolution is true and we're kind of just like on the way to the next thing, there literally can't be human rights because there also are no such thing as humans. There's no such thing as anything, essentially, because there are no natures. Again, this guy earlier was talking about how a tree has this certain nature and a maple tree has this certain nature. That's a metaphysical assumption. You're assuming that things have natures, stable natures that exist, across time. You're assuming that everything isn't just constantly in flux. Maybe there's no such thing as a tree, and there's only just something that is right now we think of it as a tree, but it's kind of on the way of becoming something else, and before that it was something else. Yeah. What I mean to say is that in the atheist worldview, there's no human dignity. And we've seen this play across history. We've seen it play across many, many, many human civilizations that had their own quote unquote philosophy, whether it be objectivism, communism, capitalism, whatever.
Force. I mean, we can develop as human beings. We can observe reality and see that in order for human beings to live and flourish, and to do so in a social context, we need to use our minds, produce values, trade values, and not use physical force against each other, because that's how we can flourish. And if instead we throw that stuff away or never learn that stuff because we didn't discover Locke and the founders or the ideas that.
Also, if he doesn't believe in an unseen realm, what even is the mind? Like, if the brain is just a computer receiving inputs, then that means there's no free will. That means determinism is true, which means, number one, we can't have any knowledge because whatever we claim, we were just predetermined to claim that. And like, you can't get outside the box. You can't get outside of the determinist box because there's no free will if there's no unseen realm, if there is no mind.
That brought this stuff to bear on us. Then, yeah, we live basically as animals, attacking each other and killing each other for tribal reasons, rather than recognizing each other as individuals.
Again, in the atheist worldview, why do we recognize each other as individuals? Like,
all of this, I think, goes to the point I'm arguing for here, which is that we need a philosophy based on the factual requirements of human life.
Here's a good question. Do animals have religion? Because if animals don't have religion, they're killing each other all the time. It's just a law of nature at that point. Yes, but animals don't have rationality.
Which we can't understand unless we put our minds to work and demand that things make sense, demand evidence in support of the ideas that we accept, and try to form a coherent, reality-grounded philosophy based on this kind of thinking. I think religion, and I know whether you want to call it religion or philosophy, I don't know that we need to debate that anymore. I think we may just disagree on that. But even if I were to say, look, there's no such thing as philosophy, there's only religion, then I would simply put it this way. Should we have a religion that is based on reason, observation, and logic and the requirements of human life here on Earth? Or should we have a religion that says we're just going to accept what our parents told us or what our culture told us, or we're going to accept things on faith and see what happens? I think...
Should we have a religion based on reason and logic? Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future, guys. Good book. Go check it out. Constantly being referenced. This guy, Craig Biddle, would definitely shave his head and join the fake and gray space cults in a heartbeat. They would promise him concubines and he would join.
That we should do the former, and I'm wondering whether you would argue that we should do the latter, and if so, why?
What percentage of the population can actually do what you described?
Right now, a very small percentage, but not because they're not physically or cognitively able to do it, but because culturally, this idea is being washed out of the equation wholesale. What we have is a false alternative between mysticism or skepticism on one hand, or religion or subjectivism is another way to think of it. And what I'm saying is neither of those is true. It's not true that there's a God who created the world and tells us what's right and wrong. And it's not true that anything goes. There's another way, there's a third way of looking at this, and that is that as human beings, in order to live, we have to use our minds in certain ways and act in certain ways. And so I would say, just to zero in on a moral principle here that I think really bears on all of this, the false alternative in morality today is that either you sacrifice yourself for others, according to altruism and sort of the Christian view of what's good and bad, right and wrong. That's why Jesus on the cross sacrificing for our sins is the big icon. It's why Mother Teresa is regarded as a paragon of virtue. So that's the one hand, is that self-sacrifice is moral. The other side of the false alternative is that if you reject self-sacrifice, your only alternative is to sacrifice other people. In other words, some kind of predation.
Yes, exactly.
Going to be sort of a Nietzschean, Ubermensch and lord it over others. I think this is a false alternative. I think we can live as non-sacrificial beings.
No, you can't, because you're sacrificing time right now to do this video. Okay? It is impossible for humans not to be sacrificial. You have to sacrifice something. You have to sacrifice something. Ultimately, is that going to come from what you have? Are you going to sacrifice your time? Are you going to sacrifice your money? Are you going to sacrifice your well-being? Or are you going to sacrifice other people's? You have no choice about being a sacrificial being. Even animals understand this. That's the problem too, is that like when this philosophy, it literally, their wisdom is turned to foolishness, okay? You literally end up less intuitive than an actual beast, than an actual animal. You actually really do kind of reduce yourself through pride to subhuman levels. In your attempt to kind of become your own God, you end up just becoming like the beasts.
we can be productive, thoughtful, rights-respecting beings if we use our rational faculty. And I do not think this is a difficult thing to explain to people. I think you can explain this to a 5-year-old. The difficulty is not in explaining why it's true and why it's a good idea to accept. The difficulty is trying to penetrate the fog that has been created and the false ideas that have been inculcated over the centuries into people's minds. And the fact that we have an education system that doesn't teach young people to think and to be active-minded, it instead says, look, religion and morality, that's for your parents and your preachers to tell you about. What we're going to tell you here is just about chemistry. I think we need to mix this stuff. I think we need to have a whole integrated worldview that says going by observation and logic is the right way to go, not only in the hard sciences, but also in morality, philosophy, and the humanities. So, yeah, I don't think, to answer your question, I don't think this is difficult to explain to people. I have a daughter who's now 23, but when she was growing up, we made it very clear to her that you can understand right and wrong and understand the world by using your mind. So I think it's very doable.
But again, you're focused on what you desire is the lived outcome. You desire a governance over the choices that people make with respect to their time, respect to their money, respect to their actions, respect to all of these things. That's what you're, rationally, this is your goal. You wish to impact how people actually live, the choices that they make with their time, their money, their body, their behavior. You want to impact how people actually live their lives, right?
I want people to flourish, and I want other people to flourish. Okay. And I think we can do that if we use reason and hold human life and flourishing as the right thing to pursue.
Okay. Well, we'll leave apart that we'll leave aside the whole conversation about flourishing, because that's not a self-evident thing either.
Yes.
But let me just use one example. Let's imagine that university professors, out of the entire population of Americans, university professors who have high IQs, who have trained...
So he's pretty much going to explain here this little study that they did where they found that university professors who were very knowledgeable, you could say rational people, were explained the benefits of saving for retirement. And they were told, hey, you rationally know that you're going to die, right? You rationally know that you will grow old. This is inevitable. Oh, yeah, I know that. Okay, cool. So it would be good and smart and rational to save for retirement. Yes, of course, yeah. And then a very, very small percentage of them actually did that. And then they did another same kind of group where instead of taking them through an explanation of the reason why they would want to save, they just showed them an aged up version of themselves, and more people from the latter group actually began to save, which kind of pokes a hole in this whole idea of if we can just rationally explain to people the good reasons for certain behaviors, then they will do those behaviors. What Paul is sort of putting forth here is even if we can grant so many of your premises, and even still, that's just not how human beings behave. That's just not how human beings behave.
Governing a lot of their morality and a lot of their behavior, because they have been competing with other people all the way along the line to get into the top university, to get to the place, and now they are teaching at this university of themselves when he has credibility with me, not just because he has a bunch of credentials, but because I have personal knowledge with him, and because I am a Christian minister, and what I do week after week is sort of, fishing in a barrel here. Because I have people who are already predisposed to trust me and believe me, and I stand up in front of church and I tell them things that almost no one would deny. Let's take just this tiny little piece of the 10 Commandments. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. Let's just take those 4 that almost everyone in all of human history will agree with. And I still can't get them to do it. And that's because if our goal is human behavior, well, the uncomfortable reality about human beings that I think even someone using the tools of philosophy should accept is that human beings don't actually behave out of a lot of rationality. They behave out of a whole set of embodied, competing desires and choices that they are usually making, for the most part, in the moment, and not on the basis of reality. And I think we in the West have really tried for a number of centuries to go about explaining, reasoning, creating arguments for people. And almost no one, first of all, I have huge doubts about the project. But secondly, I also find that, just as I said earlier, studies have repeatedly demonstrated that in terms of even secular hallmarks of flourishing, people who live embedded in religious systems, even religious systems that I personally think are complete hogwash, those people, generally speaking, statistically, have better outcomes in life, if we're looking at flourishing, than the philosophers. And I can point to philosophers. Nietzsche is, of course, a strange one, but he was one of the most perceptive philosophers in the last few centuries, and he was completely miserable. I mean, he had the...
Really phenomenal point, which is essentially the idea that man's problem is not a lack of intellect. That is not the problem. Our intellect is ultimately not the vector through which humanity is going to ascend. Okay, it is the heart. The heart of man is what is in need of healing. The heart of man is in need of repentance, is in need of God. Okay.
Capacity to see that the abandonment of these systems that we quite reasonably look at and say, wow, we have all these competing views of God. And sometimes people kill each other over these competing views of God. But without these, we are going to have to generate our own values, our own understandings, our own systems. And I think that entire project has failed. Because the irony is that, let's say, if the police show up to a house and they find a woman is dead, the first suspect is not someone with a competing religious position. The first suspect is the guy who stood up in front of all of the friends and family at one point and declared his undying love for this woman and promised to take care of her.
Do you see first of all, Paul Vanderklay is absolutely cooking right here. This is all really great stuff. And again, this is not some sort of logical argumentation with syllogisms and blah, 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 blah. He's exhorting Craig to sort of be like, Craig, you're above this. Quit being a bug man. Quit being a weird little praying mantis type human being thing. Become a human being. I'm exhorting you to become a human being. Become the image of God you were designed to be. Okay? Understand that human beings are more than just meat computers. Okay? And this Craig Biddle dude, the whole time he's looking, he's like, when is he going to finish talking so I can tell him that we need to rationally come to an understanding of why we shouldn't murder our wife? Anyways, we'll continue.
And he meant it. And everybody viewed it. But he's the number one police suspect for her murder. And the police are right. And so that's why I actually think that this entire project of Western philosophy and education has, for the most part, been a failure. And whether it's October 7 or January 7, I think both of those situations demonstrate, if you want to look even through the eyes of rationality, what human beings are and how they behave. We don't behave by building foundations and towers and justification on logic. There are some tiny percentage of the population that can sort of do that on their best days. But if I thought that project worked, I think even all of those people would be in uniform agreement. Whereas what we actually find is that the largest groups of uniform agreement, ironically, and sometimes depressingly, tend to be the religious groups. Because it's actually those kinds of stories and narratives and tools and images and pictures and modes of persuasion that actually convince human beings. And whereas it seems like a glorious idea to arrive at collective certainty through this other means, number one, I don't think you actually arrive at certainty. Number two, I don't think people actually work that way. So number three, as glorious a vision as it might be, I don't think the project's going anyway. And I think at this point in time, actually, the project is increasingly abandoned, which leads me to deeper questions of what kinds of narratives and stories do we actually need, which are going to promote what we commonly look at as human flourishing. And part of the reason that I remain a Christian is because it seems to me that the systems that we have inherited, mostly in the West, that involve doing all sorts of, if university professors would invest more in their retirement, which is a very rational thing to do, on the basis of seeing an artificial intelligence aged picture of them before them, I wonder how centuries of people seeing a man sacrificing himself for the well-being of the world has influenced them to think, maybe only now and then in their life, maybe only now and then in the most aspirational, better days, that they should love their neighbor as themselves, because that man splayed on a cross, after just looking at the crosses or looking at the image for centuries, has given us the idea that living your well-being at my expense not only makes the world better, but makes me the kind of person that people would like to be the neighbors of. And so,
Boom. Okay. Mega masterclass right there. Again, that's not a logical argument, but it's an exhortation. Okay. It's this idea that, like, look, dude, what you're trying to do, I'm rejecting the premise entirely, which is the fact that we're going to come to some sort of, logical blah, 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 blah. This bloviating nonsense. The idea is that this whole thing, number one, it's not what you think it is. Number two, I'm going to just show you, you keep talking about reality. Everything that Paul Vanderklay just said, it's so real. It's too real. It's too real to the point where people like Craig Biddle and even us, whenever we're maybe not at our best, we don't want to admit. We don't want to admit that human beings are not always rational. We don't want to admit that we need something beyond rationality to actually guide our lives. We don't want to admit a lot of times that bearing your cross is unavoidable, it's necessary, and it's the only actual dignified way to carry on human existence. Now, I've watched this video before, and so we get this amazing masterclass from Paul Vanderklay, and then Craig Biddle is just going to pretty much take it and just be like, it just went this. It is so sad. This like 5-minute monologue, which is great, it's about to just go just right over Craig Biddle's head. He literally cannot grasp it, but you could tell kind of halfway through he just stopped listening and he just started kind of waiting on when he could speak again.
that's why I maintain the belief in the tradition and the vocation that I do.
So that's a lot. Let me just say a few words about it. So I think you're pointing out here the false alternative that I'm trying to say. There's a third way of.
Duh. Okay. Well, you're pointing out that you pretty much have to have religion to be a good person and blah, blah, blah. Of course, an atheist can figure out how to not be a total idiot and how to not totally screw up their life, and they can practice self-restraint and not go and unalive their wife. But it's not because of their rationality. It is because the Christian worldview is true and also assumed in the atheist's case. They assume they pretty much smuggle the aspects of the Ten Commandments that they like, and they kind of import that into their own philosophy, and then pretend like they're standing all on their own, and they came to that through their own rational conclusions. And what is being sort of put forth here by Paul Vanderklay is, number one, human beings are not that rational. Number two, this is not a basis for morality, and it can't be. It necessarily cannot be. And we derive, not just that we have to, but we actually do derive our sense of purpose and our morality from something other than this rational process. And Craig Biddle says, "Well, no, but we don't. But we still don't need religion. We can do it. We can do it the rational way." And it's like, okay, go ahead, take a shot at it.
Looking at it, I don't think that abandoning religion for nothing is a good idea. I think that abandoning religion for reason is a good idea. And you mentioned some of the Ten Commandments and said, you have trouble getting people to do these, even though they will acknowledge that these are right in some way. I think the reason that people will hear and not integrate and employ moral commandments is precisely because they're commandments, rather than identifications of causal relationships. And this is where, again, I think reason comes in. A commandment is just thou shalt. And the rational reply to something like that is, why shalt I? What is in it for me? In other words, I think people are legitimately motivated by self-interest. They want to know, hey, if you're going to tell me I must do something, I want to know why. I want to know what the reason is. So I would divide these kinds of imperatives as categorical imperatives, a commandment or a Kantian categorical imperative, you must, no matter what, under any conditions, whatever, you have to do this thing, versus a hypothetical or a conditional imperative, which is if you want to live and flourish as a human being, then there are certain ways you need to think and act and not in other ways. Those facts and the questions and principles that we can codify around the idea of a causal environment and the goal of flourishing, that's where rational philosophy comes from. That's the ground in which rational philosophy grows.
Okay, but you kind of just let the cat out of the bag there, because your whole position is that you're an objectivist, you're a Randian. I think we can come to an objective morality. I think morality is actually objective. And then you just admitted yourself that if it's a thou shalt, then people will question it. But if we frame it in terms of a conditional or a hypothetical, like if you want X outcome, then do Y, that's subjectivism. That is subjectivism. It's the view that, well, what if I don't want that objective? Or sorry, what if I don't want that outcome? What if I want the opposite of that outcome? Well, if you want human flourishing, or if you want to avoid pain, then you should act in this way. Well, what if I don't want to avoid pain? There's people who are masochists, okay? Well, if you want people to not cause you harm, you shouldn't cause harm to them. Well, what if I want people to cause me harm? Then I should cause harm, right? What I'm saying is that there's this big promise, there's this big guarantee of an objective everything, objective knowledge, objective morality, objective truth, and he is yet to deliver on it. He's yet to even attempt to deliver on it. He just keeps reasserting it.
This is not a common thing today. I agree with you 100% that the world is not looking at things this way. When you talk about professors who act irrationally unless they see a picture and then they'll go, oh, I'll make a difference. If they see themselves at 80 and make a difference, well, that's because symbolism and images have an effect on the way that people think. It's not enough just to explain things to people. It's important to show people what happens in the world if they act this way versus if they act that way. But all of this goes to my point, which is we live in a causal environment, and the way to understand that environment and to affect positive change, including flourishing in that environment, is to use our rational faculty. So I think the false alternative of we've got to go by religion or anything goes is just wrong. And I think we can, and that we should, be teaching the rising generation that there's a third way of looking at the world, that atheism is not a philosophy, it's just a minor aspect of philosophy that, I happen to be an atheist, but I don't make a big deal of it because the fact that I don't believe in God is irrelevant to what I do believe in. I believe we live in a world that's causal and that we need to use our minds to understand it, and that if we want to live peacefully as thriving beings rather than as masters and slaves or people at war with each other, beheading each other because you don't believe in my God, that we need to use our minds. There's one topic we haven't hit on that I wanted to get your thoughts on, and that is this. And if you want to say anything about what I just said before you address this, feel free. I don't want to skip over that if you have something to say there. But I do want to talk before we go about the nature of faith and what you think faith is, and whether it's a virtue, and what exactly it means to accept ideas on faith, and whether we need to do that.
So from what I remember, they got into a discussion of faith after this, and the main thing I want to just say is that everything that we just saw from Craig Biddle was essentially him taking his own views on faith, but then asking you to take his views on faith. And he might protest and say, no, I didn't. I said we should use our reason and blah, blah, blah. I think it's abundantly clear that's not what's going on. And anybody who actually has a rational mind like what he's talking about can see that for themselves. Anyways, guys, please subscribe and leave a comment below. Have a great day.